Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
We've talked before about how if you're in the military, there's special privileges you get with respect to the civilian side of your life. And the most important one is that if you are in the military and they send you off someplace, if somebody back home wants to sue you, they got to jump through all kinds of hoops to do that. And it makes sense because you might not be available to run home and defend yourself against something. And I've mentioned this before, and one of the reasons I'm familiar with it, there are legal documents in Michigan where you must say whether the person you're suing is in the military or not, or if you know, to make sure that the court doesn't do something inappropriate to somebody who is in the military. And so the other context we've come up against on this is to do with cars, both whether a car can be repossessed while somebody is in the military, or whether a car can be towed and impounded and dealt with in a traditional sense. So, for instance, let's suppose that somebody encounters a car illegally parked. And they call the police and go, "There's a car illegally parked right here, do something about it." Police show up, slap a ticket on it, a couple days goes by, it's still there. They go, "Fine, tow it." They take it to an impound yard, it sits there. A notice is mailed to the owner and said, if you want to come get your car, you got to pay this money, but your car is here. If no response happens after so many letters, so many notices, a lot of times the impound yard can take the vehicle and sell it at auction to pay off the towing bill, and that's just the way things go. Except if that person is in the military, there's extra steps you got to take. Well, out of El Paso, and a lot of people sent me this story, thank you very much, story by Daniel Barunda for the El Paso Times. El Paso has now settled with the Department of Justice a lawsuit that the DOJ had filed after 176 soldiers' vehicles were improperly auctioned. Two companies contracted by the city of El Paso will have to pay damages and civil penalties for improperly auctioning off 176 impounded vehicles belonging to deployed U.S. military members. Now, here's the thing. I've talked about this exact same example, just not with a number so large. And anybody who's in a town near a military establishment of any sort knows this. It's hard to not notice the presence of the military, okay? Everybody knows that there's military people around. So if you are involved in a business that tows cars, impounds cars, or things like that, you have to know that. You have to know that. So the legal settlement is over $250,000, and it follows a Justice Department investigation that started with a complaint from a U.S. Army lieutenant colonel whose pickup truck was sold at auction while deployed to Afghanistan in 2019. The lawsuit's settlement was announced this month by the Justice Department in the city of El Paso. The city maintains the companies it contracted with were solely responsible with complying with the laws. But when you hire someone to do a job and they become, your agent, you want to supervise them a little bit. Last year, the U.S. government sued the city of El Paso and two towing companies who'd been contracted to run the city's impound lot for violating the Service Members Civil Relief Act. That law has been enforced since, 1940? That thing. It protects members of the military from legal actions while they're deployed. So let's suppose you wanted to sue somebody in small claims court. You file the lawsuit, you find out they're deployed. Guess what? You got to wait till they get back. No, we're not sending somebody back from overseas to fight your small claims court lawsuit, no matter how valid your suit is. The city contracted with two towing companies to run impound vehicle storage and auctions at the city lot, and the DOJ accused the companies of illegally auctioning off 176 vehicles owned by military members since 2015. And what they need to do in those situations is get a court order allowing it. And to get the court order, you've got to show that you took extra steps to make sure this person knew that something was happening and give them the opportunity to do something about it. It has to do with a thing we got called due process. Members of our armed forces should not have to worry about their cars being auctioned off while they're on the front lines defending our freedoms, liberties, and rights, said the assistant AG. These settlements should send a strong message to other cities that they should not take advantage of the rights of our service members while they are defending us from harm, The initial complaint leading to the discovery of numerous violations came from a U.S. Army officer serving in Afghanistan, and it stated the U.S. government's lawsuit against the city was filed on February 2nd, 2023. So the lawsuit goes off in all these details about what happened with the vehicles and how they got impounded and how they got sold off. And you'll notice one of the earlier facts I mentioned was the fact that this was being done on city property. And that's another thing that you often look at. A lot of times there's not necessarily a bright line as to exactly how much liability you apportion to this person versus that person. But when somebody's looking at the city's liability here, they go, okay, they hired these companies. Presumably they supervised them to some level. And oh, by the way, they let them use city property to auction off the vehicles. That's another connection to what's happening here. But I mentioned here that I, as an attorney in Michigan, have seen language about this. And I've never dealt with this. I've never had to deal with this before. But for instance, on the form you fill out to get a default. So you file a lawsuit against somebody, you serve them with the summons and complaint. The time passes for them to answer, they don't answer. You can then apply to the court and say, I want them to be put into default, and then you apply for a default judgment. And so the application for default, okay, has a checkbox series on it, and you have to check these boxes. And it starts off by saying, I request the clerk to enter the default of the party named above for a failure to plead or otherwise defend as provided by law. 2, the defaulted person is not an infant or an incompetent person. So if you served a child or an incompetent person, you have to take other steps, couldn't do this. And then it says, pick a box. 3, it is unknown whether the defaulted party is in the military service or the defaulted party is not in the military service. And also the defaulted party is in the military, but there has been notice of pendency of the action and adequate time and opportunity to appear and defend and has been provided to that person. And then it says, attached as appropriate is a waiver of rights and protections provided under the Service Member Civil Relief Act. So if you're defaulting a person, you've got to say yes or no, this person's in the military. If you don't know, you say you don't know. But then you've got to go through and do these other things. But the courts have dealt with it often enough to where they built that into the form and just said, because apparently, I'm suspecting that before that law got passed a long time ago, people probably came into court and said, yeah, I sued somebody, I served them, they didn't answer. Oh, okay. And then a year or two later, somebody comes into court and goes, I was overseas. I was serving our country overseas. That's why I didn't answer. And by the way, I'm curious to know how you got someone served over there too. That's another problem. But we won't go there. Problems with service. So here we go. In El Paso, 176 soldiers had their vehicles improperly seized and auctioned off. And again, I don't know if these were all like parking violations or if some of them may have been other things. But the fact that it was the city doing it, not banks doing it, then that would be it. But I've encountered that before. I think I've done videos on it where somebody they buy a vehicle, they're making payments on the vehicle, they head overseas for service, and while they're gone, some weird glitch happens with their bank. May or may not be something that they can take care of, but the point is that it's not like they just left and stopped making payments. They thought it was set up. Wasn't set up. Bank repoed the vehicle, and the bank should have known the person was in the military, because I suspect that when they filled out the application for the loan, they said, what do you do for a living? I am in the military. Employer. Army. Navy, Air Force, Marines, take your pick. So again, I don't have a lot of sympathy for the people who are in these military towns and don't stop to think, oh, by the way, I need to take extra special steps with members of the armed forces because they've got laws that protect them. And here's the thing. There's a lot of laws out there on those blue books behind me and the equivalent in other states where nobody enforces them. Guess what? When it comes to the armed forces and its personnel, the DOJ will step in. They'll enforce it, and they'll get a result. So they got a result here as El Paso settles with the DOJ the lawsuit over the 176 soldiers whose vehicles were improperly auctioned. There you go. From the El Paso Times, Daniel Barundo wrote that. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. This is the beginning of a beautiful friendship.